Throughout human history, products, industries, and even society itself has gone through constant waves of significant development. Take, for example, fashion. From the loincloth to the jeans we wear, internet from dial-up to constant connection in each one of our pockets, and even technology itself, Stone Age to the information age. Well, with coffee, it's no different. And today, I'm gonna take you through the 5 waves of coffee that we know to date. And even at the end, I'm gonna throw in some of my own thoughts for where we could be heading next. But I don't know what I'm still doing in this water because it's freezing and these waves are just taking me away. Now, today, I'm not gonna get into the complex origins of coffee or the fact that coffee had gone through a few waves of its own over in Europe since the 1700s. But the coffee waves narrative that we're gonna be digging into today really does start in the US. And we've got a lot to go through, 5 whole waves. So I've got my notes here and let's dig right into it. So the first wave, this is really the traditional coffee drinking culture of the time. This is when coffee really started to gain popularity, especially in North American homes. Companies from the late 1800s like Folgers and Maxwell House really started to commercialize this roasted bean, and it was very much treated as a commodity right alongside salt, rice, wheat, that kind of thing. And shortly into the 20th century, instant coffee and the vacuum sealer were also invented. So this was about extending the shelf life, the freshness of coffee, and it started showing up in supermarkets and therefore homes around the country. It wasn't tasty, it wasn't about the quality, but it was cheap and it did have caffeine. So that's what counted. So it wasn't until like half a century later, in the mid-1900s, that the second wave of coffee emerged as a few companies got the bright idea to kind of start turning this coffee drinking phenomena into more of a lifestyle. In the 60s and 70s, we started seeing bigger branded chains like Peet's Coffee and Starbucks showing up on the scene, and Starbucks really is one of the biggest global examples of this second wave. The second wave was centered around enjoyment, around music, art, bringing people together and creating a nice space to hang out. Starbucks sort of pioneered the term, which was originally an urban planning term called the third place. So this is a space that is not work, it's not home, but one that people like to go and spend some time, such as a cafe. And it was during this time that Italian words such as barista, espresso, cappuccino really became commonplace in the vocabulary of ordering coffee in cafes across the country. So even the espresso machine, which is originally an Italian invention, became a mainstay over in North America and really started to become popular. Interestingly, it was this commercialization of the whole coffee experience that really spawned the third wave of coffee in the early 2000s. Third wave was almost more of a movement. I see it as kind of a forking in the coffee industry as a reaction to what had been going on previously, and really a development of a whole new subculture. So it brought a laser focus to the bean itself, brewing methods, origin sourcing, and unique independent cafes. It really represented the love of the craft, local roasting brands, rockstar baristas, and along with that, a much stronger traceability of the coffees that cafes were serving. So instead of just saying coffee or even 100% Arabica, which I'm sure it was, but the regions and the processes and the elevations and the roasting dates also started showing up, which is maybe more indicative. So the more specific at that time, the better. There was a big push to educate customers about the coffee and where it came from. So while extracting the perfect espresso shot or twirling pour-overs to precision, scales, grind sizes, this would sometimes come with a small dose of pretentiousness from the coffee community. So things like no sugar, no milk, being denied things that coffee drinkers had been used to for years before that. Nothing but the lightest roast, only coffee grown over 2,000 meters above sea level. But I think that kind of comes with any reaction to the status quo. And I believe it all sort of served its unique purpose. It just kind of took us to the next level, and it brought quality into the whole coffee experience. So with this incessant need for good coffee, we started taking our favorite coffees everywhere we went as part of a travel and adventure lifestyle. And that is where the sponsor for today's video plays a major role, Wakako. So we're gonna brew a nice Spro on the go right here on the beach with the Nanopresso. This is awesome. So I like to use the barista extension pack, which allows me to put a double espresso canister or filter, and then I use a minimal amount of water to make, my favorite style of espresso a little bit more intense. So whether you're on a plane, a train, or right here on the beach, you can craft yourself a third wave espresso wherever you find yourself or lose yourself. The fourth wave. What is the fourth wave of coffee? This is where the lines start to blur a little bit. Some would say that it is happening now. Others might not even acknowledge that it's real. But for the purposes of this video, we'll say that it has already waved. Many are referring the fourth wave as the science of coffee. So much more attention to water chemistry, even more precise measurements, next level equipment, but also a major emphasis on sustainable farming practices and studying the impacts of climate change on producers and also on the whole supply network as a whole. So in my research and my coffee travels to various cafes around the world, I felt that as a reaction to the sometimes snobbish third wave culture, the fourth wave was a lot more about bringing coffee service to the next step. So cafes really going out of their way to treat the customer and educating in a very non-judgy way, as well as bringing coffee into more fine dining and food pairing type situations. So there's a lot more to what defines the fourth wave, and I believe that it's still being written. But that brings us to the last wave that we'll cover today, the fifth wave. If you hadn't guessed, they just keep on going. So the fifth wave really is about the business of coffee. It was allegedly coined by Allegra Strategies, which is a coffee consultancy, and they've defined the fifth wave as the business of coffee, of which they also have a magazine and a podcast under the same moniker. So if you're interested in that, I'll actually leave it down in the description because they've got some interesting content that you might want to dig into if you're involved in the business of coffee. But I can see this really being pioneered recently by bigger brands such as Blue Bottle, Arabica, where they've really taken strong third wave ideals and they've been able to apply them to a chain store scalability to reach bigger markets. So this is more like boutique chains which pride themselves on high quality service and experience. So they're constantly implementing new technologies to make working in coffee a much more viable career path, from baristas to producers and everyone in between. And it really is about the ideology that there is, in fact, money to be made in coffee if an organized strategy is involved and implemented. And maybe that's not so much of a bad thing. So what's next for coffee? Is there a sixth wave, seventh wave, or is it more just refining all the previous waves and building on those? Because I believe that each of the 5 waves we've discussed today are still in practice. They are still in effect in this world, but it's really about building on each one for its place in this global economy. So my personal opinion is that we're going to start seeing even more decentralization as a response to the increase of specialty coffee in mainstream culture. A lot more coffee nerds brewing and maybe even roasting at home, coffee farmers marketing their own stories and their own brands, which was something that was a lot more reserved to coffee roasters and coffee importers in the past. But with new technologies, we're starting to see a lot more of that happen, and even a surge of coffee producing countries consuming a lot more of their own coffee. So you're seeing this happen in places like Mexico, Indonesia, Thailand. Not the only ones, but those are to name a few. So as you can see, it is a constantly evolving industry, and I am super excited to be a part of it, to be involved in all of it. So what do you think? What is next for coffee? Do leave it down in the comments, and I will see you in the next video. Cheers.